All right, so it looks like if you're hearing this, you did find the second video. So this is the first graph that we'll see where we are not at long run equilibrium because again, there is no place where all three curves are intersecting. So this is what we call a recessionary gap, or the sort of FRQ language that you want to look out for. If they would say start ADAS at a recession or below full employment, because again, full employment is out here where LRAS is. And if we are not in long run equilibrium where all three curves intersect, we are at a short run equilibrium. So it makes sense that we would label our short run equilibrium point where SURAS intersects with AD because we are not at long run equilibrium. So that's why we label price level 1 our starting point here, and then Y1, again, Y just shorthand for real GDP or our real production, our real output. That's why we have equilibrium labeled here. And it makes sense because we are to the left of this curve, which represents our full employment. So the little red bracket that you see down near the bottom of the graph, that actually represents the gap in our production. YF is our real GDP, our production at full employment, where we're using all of our resources and we have 4 to 5% unemployment. But in a recession, we are down here at, whoop, go away. Get out of here. There. So we are down here at Y1. So that little red bracket, that represents the gap between where we are, which is Y1, and YF, which is where we should be. So that is basically like our economy has potential, but we are not yet reaching that potential because we are in a recession or below full employment. So that just represents, this graph represents we could and should be producing more, but for whatever reason, we are not. So then something on this graph will have to shift in order to get us back to long run equilibrium where all three curves intersect. Now, this is another graph where we are not at long run equilibrium. Because, again, there's nowhere on this graph where all three curves intersect. We have LRAS, SURAS, and then AD is over here. And again, that's actually going through the horizontal range of SURAS, which we said earlier represents a depression or severe recession. So if on an FRQ you are ever asked to start ADAS at recession, or excuse me, severe recession at depression, this is where you want to start. This is essentially a very slowed down economy. So it's an awful recession or a depression. So again, we can see that gap down here at the bottom. YF and Y1 are even further away than they were on the previous gap, on the previous recessionary gap graph. So we still label it the same, where AD intersects with SURAS, because again, this is a short run equilibrium point. We need to eventually get back to long run equilibrium where LRAS, SURAS, and AD all intersect. So here basically prices are super low. Output, our real GDP, is also super low. And this whole chunk right here, that's getting really annoying. That whole weird chunk down here between Y1 and YF, that represents the gap. We should be at YF, at real GDP at that point, but we're way back to the left at Y1. So this is a really bad situation for our economy to be in. Think Great Depression here. Now, this is the last graph where the economy is not at long-run equilibrium. Again, we know it's not at long-run equilibrium because we have LRAS, SURAS, and AD, but only two of them ever intersect. So again, this is a temporary place. An economy does not want to be at inflation or even at recession or depression for very long. So we want to eventually work our way back to wherever all three curves intersect. So we label our short run equilibrium right here. Again, just PL1, price level 1 is where we start, and then Y1. Now you might look at that and say, well, wait, this is our maximum possible production at YF. So isn't it a good thing that we're way out here at Y, like we're producing past our maximum? Well, no, not really, because that's not even really possible. When we look at it, economics, we try to simplify on the graphs. this doesn't mean that we're producing all the way out here and we're producing way more stuff in the long run. There might be a short term, a small increase in production, but the problem is when you're producing all of the way out here, you need to keep hiring more and more and more workers to meet that production. And the problem is you're hiring more and more workers, or businesses are hiring more and more workers, and that increases their production costs. So what's really ending up happening is price level is increasing, but the actual production, the actual GDP in the long run is not. So just like this note says over here, there might be a very short boost, but we would actually say that there is no real growth in our output, because by hiring all of these workers to meet that output, price level increases, which causes inflation, which actually hurts our real GDP. So again, we would say at this inflationary gap, or if it FRQ language, they would say start the graph at inflation or start it beyond full employment, because again, here would be our full employment, and then here is our short term, our short run equilibrium point. We would actually say that actually there would not be an increase in output because price level is increasing with it beyond our long run output. So I'm going to take a break and stop it here. The final file that will pop up is just going to show us how do we actually shift AD and then SURAS, LURAS, just because it can get a little bit funky, and depending on what videos you watch, there's a couple of different ways to do it. So if you like one of those other methods better, go for it. But I'm just going to show you a way that works and try and keep it as manageable as possible for us. So check out that next video, and I'll see you in a minute.